at the 15th session of the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change agreed to take note of at the final plenary on the 18th of December 2009. The accord, drafted by, on the one hand, the United States and on the other, in a united position as the basic countries, is not legally binding and does not commit countries to agree to a binding successor to the Kyoto Protocol, whose round ended in 2012. Summary. The accord endorses the continuation of the Kyoto Protocol, underlines that climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our time, and emphasizes a strong political will to urgently combat climate change in accordance with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system, recognizes the scientific view that the increase in global temperature should be below 2 degrees Celsius, in a context of sustainable development, to combat climate change, recognizes the critical impacts of climate change and the potential impacts of response measures on countries particularly vulnerable to its adverse effects, and stresses the need to establish a comprehensive adaptation program including international support, recognizes that deep cuts in global emissions are required according to science, and agrees cooperation in peaking global and national greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, and that a low-emission development strategy is indispensable to sustainable development, states that enhanced action and international cooperation on adaptation is urgently required to reduce vulnerability and build resilience in developing countries, especially in those that are particularly vulnerable, especially least developed countries, small island developing states and Africa, and agrees that developed countries shall provide adequate, predictable and sustainable financial resources, technology and capacity building to support the implementation of adaptation action in developing countries. About mitigation, agrees that developed countries would commit to economy-wide emissions targets for 2020 to be submitted by the 31st of January 2010, and agrees that these parties to the Kyoto Protocol would strengthen their existing targets. Delivery of reductions and finance by developed countries will be measured, reported and verified in accordance with COP guidelines. Agrees that developing nations would implement mitigation actions to slow growth in their carbon emissions, submitting these by the 31st of January 2010. LDS and SIDS may undertake actions voluntarily and on the basis of support